Small Changes by Digits 27, Chapter 27, Familiar Exams. The trip to Takagakure was as uneventful as it could be for Team 7. They ran most of the way, not sprinting, but keeping to a good pace for gaining, going on tuning. Sasuke stayed relatively quiet, only drawn into conversations when Ame bugged him enough, Sakura pried enough, and Naruto was cheeky enough. The two kunoichi of the group traded banter and light barbs. Aime's newfound confidence clashing with Sakura's natural stubborn streak. It was amusing to watch them go at it, and Naruto even saw a hint of a smile on Sasuke's carefully molded features once or twice. However, other than that, uneventful, or it was until they arrived at the rendezvous point they were supposed to meet at, somewhere around the presumed location of Takagakure. The village hidden in the waterfalls was a hidden village in the truest meaning of the phrase. If you were not born there or a Takagakure shinobi, you didn't know where it was, period. It was why the relatively small and only modestly powerful village had managed to stave off invasion for so long, and why it was a bad idea to declare war on them. Teams of shinobi could spend weeks of floundering around the valleys of Tane no Kuni, slowly being worn down by Taki's ambushes and guerrilla tactics. Naturally, people still needed to enter somehow, including visiting shinobi and merchants, which raised the problem of how to keep the village hidden. The answer was to have everybody blindfolded, dragged underwater a fair away before being led around a dizzying number of turns that even somebody with an idiotic memory would have struggled to remember. The light sense of genjutsu Naruto could distinctly feel didn't help, and no matter what he tried, for some reason he could not dispel it. By the time they made it out of the confusing cave system and the blindfolds were removed, they were wet, cold, and disoriented. However, Naruto was remarkably happy to see his genin made no fuss over it, simply accepting it as a necessary precaution Taki had to take. He also noted with some amusement that the small squad of Taki Chunin that had escorted them seemed upset by their distinct lack of reaction. He assumed that many who made that journey, especially civilians, would have complained a great deal more. As it was, he could see the slight twitch to Sasuke's eye, and he quickly hurried his team along. The residents of Takigakure seemed friendly enough, at least until they caught sight of their headbands. Then, suddenly, it was all cold looks, nervousness, and hints of disdain. Naruto began to feel like this may have been how he was treated if his father wasn't who he was. He'd had a good life, all things considered, Jinchuriki status included, and he could imagine how much worse it could have been. Then again, he had refrained from much contact with the beast inside him, just like his mother and Mito before him had done. It did raise his respect for Fu, though, the only other well adjusted-ish Jinchuriki he had met. Naruto, a rough but decidedly female voice called out from somewhere among this team. All of them, including Sasuke, looked over as one to see the mint-haired girl around Naruto's age that had called out to them. She was sitting atop a nearby rooftop, letting her legs dangle over the edge as she munched on some takoyaki that was happily steamed away on a plate to her side. Naruto's eyebrow rose in surprise as he wondered, and not for the first time, whether he could summon people by thinking their name. Fu! The young woman beamed as she had her suspicion confirmed, quickly pouring the remaining octopus balls into a large tumbler red container that was swiftly slung onto her back. She hopped down to street level, still grinning, and rushed over. Her orange eyes seemed to light up as she got closer. I figured there weren't that many people with spiky hair that red. Didn't expect to see you here, though, she greeted merely, her eyes swiveling down to the three younger teams eyeing her up in turn. And with a group of genin, no less. She smirked deviously as her attention returned to the object of her notice. Going soft on me, Namikaze? Naruto just chuckled at that, almost automatically reaching over to ruffle one of his genin's hair. Sakura just happened to be the unlucky one that was closest. "We'll see after they trash the Chunin exams, won't we?" he replied back, a smirk of his own coming into play as the two Jinchuriki stared each other down. "Oh, confident, aren't we?" Fu noted cheekily, hands going to her hips as she decided to take a second look at the three younglings behind Naruto. His genin seemed to puff up at the praise and confidence Naruto was showing in them before Ame sobered and pointed out the obvious. Do you know her, Sensei? The violet asked curiously, at the same time snapping Sasuke and Sakura out of their momentary moment of pride. Naruto chuckled sheepishly and ran a hand through his hair, somehow managing not disturb a single red spike as they all bounced back into place. Yeah, we actually met during our cheating exams. So a while ago, Naruto admitted, causing his skinny eyes to widen. After all, Fu only looked a few years their senior, definitely younger than Naruto at least. You were at the same tuning exams as Naruto sensei? Sakura asked incredulously. After all, the redhead had told him he had been only 10 at the time, so Fu must have been even younger. Picking up on the reason for their incredulity, Fu could only chuckle. Only Naruto and Sasuke noted the slightly dark look that flashed across her eyes. Yeah, well, let's just say my village was rather eager to see me gain power quickly, she grumbled with half-hearted venom, covered up by a rather fake grin that forced her eyes to close just like a Kashi. The Genin blinked in confusion as Aime looked between the two older teens, her eyes slowly narrowing as she took in Naruto's awkward expression and Fu's suddenly defensive posture. So, you're, like Naruto-sensei? She asked slowly, immediately taking the surprised looks that crossed both their faces as a confirmation. Fu's alarm was a rather amusing contrast compared with Naruto's raised eyebrow and her teammates' confused expressions. What did she mean by? Sasuke started only to get cut off as Naruto waved his hand quickly, trying to mask his urgency. He had yet to tell his Genin of his tenant, and now was certainly not the best time to have that conversation. Amma had only worked it out because she was around the house basically every day, and Uncle had problems keeping her mouth shut when in the comfort and privacy of her own home. It wasn't that he thought they weren't mature enough or that they would look at him differently. He just hadn't gotten around to it yet. It's not something to talk about right now. You guys have enough on your plate as it is with the exams. The redhead grinned suddenly, turning back to Sasuke before continuing. But if you all make it through the tuning exams and pass, I'd be happy to fill you in. He looked back up and adopted a fox thoughtful expression before smirking. That, or you could try and get it out of Ame, whatever works. He admitted, getting Ame to stare at him in horror, knowing just what hell he had thrown her into. However, it served its purpose. A nonchalant way Naruto had gone about talking with it reduced Sasuke's interest enough for him to drop the subject. Yeah, it's not exactly friendly dinner conversation after all, Fu added, and helpfully and all too cheerily, almost making Naruto want to facepalm. His work was destroyed and Sasuke immediately looked interested again. Now, Naruto felt sorry for throwing Ame to the proverbial wolves. Not really helping, Naruto sighed, only eliciting a small and utterly carefree shrug from the grinning green-haired girl. Wasn't really trying to, but it's been a while. It's been a long time since we last saw each other. Want to go somewhere and catch up? Fu diverted expertly, giving an all too cheerful smile as she brushed off Naruto's irritation like it was dust on her shirt. However, Naruto couldn't help but think that the smile looked a little too practiced. Sensei, what about us? Sakura cut in, still looking between the two older teens oddly. We still need to get to the exams. Fu looked down at the pinkette and for just a moment irritation flashed across her orange orbs, but it wasn't noticed. Oh, in that case the exams are taking place in the academy. It's down this road. You turn left at the stop that smells like raw fish and down the main road. Big building with a tiled roof, the most horrible shade of pale green. You'll know it, Fu stated offhandedly, causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow at the almost dismissive tone as the vedette turned back to him. So about that conversation, she asked, a hint of something more than just friendly questioning behind those orange eyes. She had to almost visibly bite back a small growl as Ame tugged on Naruto's sleeve, sending distrustful looks Fu's way. Sensei, come on, the exam started in a few minutes, she stated mutely, her tone questioning as she turned to the redhead. Naruto's glances passed between his waiting team and the equally anxious-looking Jinchuriki across from him before sighing deeply. Then you guys better make tracks or you'll be late. He finally managed to get out, dreading the look of betrayal briefly passing over Ame's features. It never came, though. In fact, she looked rather impassive about the whole affair as she let go of his sleeve and returned to her teammates. Naruto hazarded a small smile as he playfully ruffled the girl's hair, worried by her lack of reaction. Come on, I'm not always going to be around, especially if you guys make tuning. I'll be right here though when you get back from passing the first round. The confidence in his voice seemed to go a small way in reassuring the girl, and his smile widened. Now get going. Being late is not a good trait for a shinobi to develop, as much as Kakashi would disagree. He mumbled the last part as the three turned to go, only giving him one last look before disappearing off down the road. That looked hard. The kids really mean that much to you? Seems like a silly thing to get attached to, seeing as you're probably going to lose touch with them soon after they pass, Fu mentioned casually as Naruto tore his gaze away from the retreating backs. They grow on you, as much as you try and distance yourself. His attention turned back to the vedette fully, his smile weakening slightly despite hers only growing. You don't know. I'd assumed you'd become a jonin by now. Fu just gave him a cocky smirk, her hand going back to her lips as she looked up with over-exaggerated haughtiness. I'll have you know that I became a jonin when I was 13. Naruto just gave her an equally fake but playfully so look as though he were impressed. Wow, so that would be a few years after I made Ambu captain then. Pretty good, he quipped, smirking as Fu's shoulders sagged slightly and a light glare was sent his way. However, it cleared up in a flash, replaced by her usual exuberant smirk. All right, Mister, show off. How about a quick spar, huh? See who gets the last laugh? She challenged with a smirk, bouncing from one foot to the other. Energetically, Naruto chuckled, but waved his hands dismissively all the same. Thanks, but no thanks. I'll try not to start an international incident before I've made a Hokage. Naruto cursed in his head almost as soon as he said it. It would just slipped out as he was unused to having to conceal it. Sure enough, Fu's eyebrows nearly disappeared into her hairline. You're going to be made Hokage? She nearly shouted. Thankfully, the shock seemed to keep it down to a hoarse whisper, and none of the surrounding passers-by, of which there were notably few, seemed to hear. Ah, I wasn't really supposed to say that. Not really a secret, but well, I haven't exactly accepted the offer, the redhead admitted slowly, preempting Fu's question by smiling and rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. Maybe we could go somewhere else to talk, he suggested quickly, before Fu found her voice again. The statement seemed to rouse Fu from her surprise, and she nodded dumbly before shaking her head as if to remove cobwebs. Yeah, I was going to suggest that anyway, she stated, mute surprise still lacing her tone as she turned and started moving almost robotically. 5 minutes later, and they were sitting up in one of the lower branches of the enormous tree that overshadowed pretty much the entirety of Taki. It made Naruto wonder how the village could stay hidden so easily with such an enormous landmark that he distinctly did not remember seeing anywhere nearby the rendezvous point. This is an interesting spot, Naruto ventured after a few too many long seconds of rather awkward silence. Fu looked around, her shock having faded to be replaced by a half-lidded, content expression as her legs swung lazily beneath her. I always came up here to relax at the end of the day. It's one of the few places that you can see the sunset. Naruto blinked in confusion before looking up at the sky. What do you... He trailed off, noticing for the first time that there was no sun in the sky, nor were there any clouds, just the solid blue sky that just got lighter towards the horizon. He wondered how he could have missed something so glaringly obvious. He was usually more observant than that. However, Fu's genuine laughter gave him the idea that it wasn't just him being inattentive. Yeah, the Genjutsu trick a lot of people when they first come here. It's amusing every time. I swear some merchants have panic attacks, thinking that we did something to the sun while their backs were turned. She snorted, good-naturedly, her smile becoming noticeably less forced. Genjutsu? Naruto questioned, glancing back up to the sky and scrutinizing it for a moment. Sure enough, he noticed the faint shimmer over the sky when he squinted hard enough. If you're not careful, your face will stick that way, Fu commented cheekily, punching the redhead lightly in the arm. But yeah, there's a genjutsu set up over the entire village. It's what protects us from being found. She blinked before looking down with a smirk. That and every Takenin is a paranoid nutter that'd rather bite their tongue off than divulge village secrets. Naruto raised an eyebrow in her direction, rubbing his arm lightly. She punched harder than Anko did, even playfully. Then I can only presume you're not of the same mind, he hazarded a guess, eyebrow raised. Fu simply shrugged as if she didn't care one way or another, a worrisome attitude to take for Jinchuriki. So you became a tuning and got yourself a team. She quickly interjected, obviously trying to change the subject. She seemed to quite tense all of a sudden, so Naruto acquiesced with a small nod. Yeah, not entirely my choice, but I can't say I regret it either. According to a certain someone, it's apparently done me a world of good. Fu snorted invertly at that again, unable to hide the smirk. Not that she was remotely trying. Oh, so the big, bad, bloody Flash got himself tied down to some gakis, and they managed to touch a soft spot in his heart. I could write a series of sappy novels with that premise, she chided playfully, amusement twinkling in her eyes, seemingly the first real emotion Naruto had seen on the girl yet. Stupid nickname, Naruto grumbled to himself before looking up, shoving away his mild irritation. But that's me. What about you? You seem, well, better than the last time I saw you. Fu's expression soured for only a fraction of a second before it returned to a more resigned look. Yeah, I soldiered through. Got some respect when I became Chunin. Worked my ass off to become a Jonin, and now here I am. She raised her arms out to either side and looked down at the village. Her voice raised slightly. A halfway respected member of society. There was a touch of resentment in her voice that Naruto decided not to touch on, only to find there was no need as the verdette turned back to him with a tired kind of smile. Hey, I'm even a proctor for this year's Chunin exams, so how's that? Her upbeat, if not slightly forced comment earned a small smile from the redhead. That's great. He turned his head down to the village to look at the village as she had been doing. I hear stories, about the others. They seem rather mixed, from outright scorn to village-wide praise and everywhere in between. He smiled softly as he turned back, surprising Fu with the sincerity in his expression. There's so few of us out there. We got to look out for one another, right? I'm glad to know you're at least doing okay. You were the first other Chinjurki I met. Fu nodded at that. Yeah, you're the same for me. She chuckled humorously. However, the turn in conversation seemed inevitable. Before that, I really did think it was hopeless, that nothing was ever going to change. She sighed before forcing a smile onto her features. But meeting you gave me a little hope. Seeing how your teammates didn't flinch away from you or glare at you behind your back, it made me think that if I worked hard enough that I could have the same. Naruto frowned at seeing just how fake that smile really was. It didn't reach her eyes at all, not like before when genuine amusement sparkled in their orange depths. And he asked cautiously, only to get another tired smile. Village-wide praise? Fu asked suddenly, her expression becoming curious as she blatantly moved the conversation onwards and away from the touchy subject. Naruto sighed internally before smirking. Kumo, the girl just looked up with her mouth forming a small O before looking back down, both lapsing into silence again. It awkwardly continued for around a few minutes with Fu shifting restlessly and Naruto tapping his fingers on the branch. So, you're proctor for the exams? Naruto finally ventured, getting anxious with the silence that was only broken by the rustling of leaves above them and little else. Fu managed to look back up, apparently sorting out her emotions to the point where her forced smile looked almost genuine again. Yep, why? You worried about your kitties? She teased, easing back into the conversation without problem. Naruto didn't want to think about how much practice we would have taken her to make it seem that easy. Nah, I trained them well and trust them enough, but never hurts to be safe. He shot back truthfully, feeling oddly open around the younger mint-haired girl. Well, you've got nothing to worry about in the first round, I suppose. Fu mused quietly, glancing across at the academy building not too far away that Naruto had to agree had the vilest shade of green adorning its roof. The candidates all walk into a room expecting a test. It's easy enough, and even most academy graduates would be able to finish it. Naruto raised an eyebrow, wondering what the catch was. The first exam always had a catch. He knew he was right when Fu smirked, obviously enjoying his inquisitive look. Before the test starts, they'll be told they're allowed to leave the room at any point if they feel they are unable to continue. Her smirk only grew. There's actually a genjutsu on the room, though. If the candidate manages to break it, they'll see the paper is actually blank, with instructions on the back that ask them to leave the room to complete the test. Fu continued, the smile now positively devious. However, Naruto couldn't see the problem. Most scanning could break one illusion without too much problem. However, Fu wasn't done, it seemed. The kicker is the fact that the genjutsu is double layered. Anybody who leaves the room automatically fails. However, if they manage to break both illusions, they'll find a second set of instructions asking them to leave their test blank and wait until it's over. She turned to him with a bright grin. Pretty smart, huh? The vedette exclaimed, her legs freely swinging again. She frowned when Naruto shrugged. He knew Ibiki would call the method soft or some such, likely not enough psychological torture for the man. Seems a bit weighted in favor of genjutsu users, he chuckled softly. Although I think my team has a rather unfair advantage, what with Sasuke's Sharingan. That was if the boy decided to activate them. He could instantly be able to see through both genjutsu. Fu shrugged at the criticism, obviously not too concerned. Well, Taki is rather proud of our genjutsu. We have to get an edge in somewhere. Plus, it's a pretty important skill for a chunin to have. Doesn't matter how good you are at fighting, if you're gonna have your throat slit by the first illusionist you come across. She shot back, earning an agreeing nod from the redhead. He couldn't exactly argue with what with being a teammate of two Uchiha for so long. He knew just how dangerous genjutsus could really be, but we leave enough clues that something wrong for observationalist people to notice. Like a few of the proctor's flak jackets are the wrong color, or the weather in the windows doesn't quite match up, she added in quickly. Plus, only one member of the team needs to pass for the rest too, as long as one of the others doesn't get themselves disqualified. What if one of the candidates just doesn't write anything, even without noticing the genjutsu? Naruto asked curiously, causing Fu to look at him rather strangely. What are the chances of that happening? You'd have to be some kind of damn lucky idiot to blindly get through that way. Fu shot back, still staring at him oddly and wondering where that came from. Naruto just chuckled sheepishly. He wasn't even sure why that thought occurred to him either. Yeah, well, seems like it would weed quite a few out to begin with, Naruto commented with an amused smile. The more he listened, the more he thought the test was something Ibiki would actually approve of. It was devious, brutal, and unforgiving, not to mention having a solid backing in the skill Chunin would need and enough edge to give Taki the advantage. After all, the minor villages couldn't afford to be quite as impartial as the larger villages' tests. Yeah, well, in the nicest terms, Taki doesn't really want people sticking around too long. Really, they want the tuning exams over with as soon as possible. Did I mention they're paranoid nutters that'll bite their tongue off? Yeah, you might have mentioned it. Naruto interrupted with a smirk, getting Fu to hit him lightly on the arm again. Cheeky, she chided with a smile of her own as the two lapsed into a far more comfortable silence this time. So, if you're a proctor, how come you're not down at the academy? Naruto finally asked after a good 30 seconds of quiet thought. It seemed to catch Fu off guard as she looked up quizzically for a moment. Oh, I'm the proctor for the second exam. She looked up at the sky for a moment and squinted before smirking. I'm not up for another 10 minutes, she answered easily, causing Naruto to blink and look up as well. You can tell the time from the sky? How? It was all rather disorienting for him, not having the sun as a reference. Everyone in Taki can sooner or later. It's just one of those things you get used to. The sky gets lighter then darker over the day without changing all that much, so you can estimate the time from it. I swear though, old man Shibardo can tell what time it is to the minute. It's freaky. She shuddered in an exasperated manner at the thought. Naruto knew Shibardo was the current leader of Taki, seeing as the minor villages did not have leaders with Kage status. The only one that had ever come close was Amigakuri with Sancho no Hanzo. So, what do you do as a proctor? The redhead asked curiously. He knew Anko had also been a second task proctor, so he was interested in how the two villages differed in that regard. However, Fu simply gave him a sly look as she slid along the branch until she was a breath away from his face, a strange look in her eye. Why, Namikaze-san, you wouldn't be trying to get hints out of poor little old me just to pass along to your team, would you? She asked in a decidedly sultry voice, her eyes half lidded to hide the playful sparks that had taken up residence there. Naruto was unperturbed though, far too used to Uncle's little pranks to be affected by a girl he barely knew. And what if I am? Naruto asked right back, his voice taking on a similar tone as he closed the distance between them even further to the point where their bodies could have held a magazine between them. Uh, Fu turned a rather amused shade of red, made more impressive by her already dark skin tone, stuttering suddenly as she jerked back. She was obviously not expecting her little trick to be turned on her so easily, and Naruto could almost see the steam coming from her ears. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land for a few moments before Naruto lit up with his look and let out a soft chuckle. Sorry about that. I couldn't resist. He didn't look particularly sorry for his features twisted into an expression of visible amusement. Really, Fu should have picked her target better than to go for someone like him. All he had to deal with his After all, he had to deal with his fan club as a kid, uncle growing up, and even Ame, as corrupt as his girlfriend was trying to make her lately. But I am kind of interested in how the exams differ village to village. After all, he had only ever had to participate in one and watched another. Both were in Konoha. Yeah, right. Fu seemed to latch onto the shift in conversation like a lifeline, gradually accepting the moment to refirm her features and collect herself. Well, it wouldn't make much of a difference anyway, as you can't see your students between the first and second task anyway. Fu finally managed to get out, her face losing its rosy hue as her emotions were wrangled back under her control. Ah, this would be Taki trying to get them over with as soon as possible then. Naruto offered helpfully to keep the conversation going. Fu nodded quickly and gratefully, a smile returning to her face as she got over her previous shock. Yeah, yeah, that's right. The candidates all get led to the system of natural caves that run under the village. It's like a maze down there which is made even worse by the disorienting genjutsu laced on that area. Fu continued, confidence returning to her tone, slowly but surely as she spoke about more familiar topics. I remember I felt that when we were being led into the village. Naruto muttered to himself. Fu heard and nodded quickly. Yeah, but you also noticed you couldn't break it for some reason, Fu interjected, earning a quick nod which made her smirk. The genjutsu is constantly held by the chakra coming through the trees, same as the one spanning the village. She patted the large branch they were sitting on. As Naruto looked up into the soaring canopy high above them, he imagined it without the genjutsu taking away the sun. The tree alone would cast a shadow over half the village. So, what? You break the genjutsu, but it's instantly reapplied because it has an unlimited source of chakra? Naruto guessed with no small amount in incredulity in his tone. He had been wondering about the tree since he had first seen it. He knew that Taki was the main source of chakra paper in the elemental nations, and now he knew why. It all probably came from this tree, if it was that chakra rich. However, he had never heard of a plant being so full of energy before, and as if recognizing his expression, Fu chuckled softly. Don't even bother asking. The tree's been here long since before the fountain of the village, far as anyone can tell, and it'll probably be outlasted too, Fu explained with what seemed to be her trademark smirk. Huh, so what then? Naruto prompted, getting them back on track. Well, the candidates are all thrown into the cave system, told they have to collect one of 10 scrolls scattered throughout. Except there are only 8 scrolls, Fu exclaimed, obviously rather proud of the system for the second test, lending Naruto to believe she had at least in part come up with it. Naturally, Naruto commented with a cheeky smile, ended up getting another punch to the arm for his sass. Right, Fu continued, eyeing Naruto as if daring him to interrupt again. Naruto just made a sipping motion across his lips and smiled innocently. Well, they're told they have to get one of the scrolls and make it back to one of the 10 exits. She caught Naruto looking at her out of the corner of her eye and sighed exasperation. Yes, there are actual 10 exits. Thank you very much. We're not that cruel. However, as if by an afterthought, she smirked. However, as each exit is used, they get sealed off. That part Naruto could tell was definitely her idea, as she looked almost sadistically proud of it. So they have to navigate the dark tunnels under a disorienting genjutsu they can't break, collect a scroll they don't know the location of, and make it to an exit they also don't know the location of. All the while, other teams are trying to do the same. They have no idea if any scrolls are left, and with every passing minute, more and more exits could be sealed off. Naruto summed up questionably, getting a happy nod from the verdette. Oh, and they have 1 day to do it in. She finished with a bright explanation, grinning in a way Naruto had seen on Anko's face too many times not to recognize. It was her. I just came up with something amusingly sadistic that you are not going to enjoy, but I will face. Huh. And the third task, 8 scrolls would leave you with a lot of candidates, 24 to be precise, bearing injuries or less scrolls being collected. Team matches. It's so we don't have to have preliminaries and extend exams even more because, you know, Fu shrugged unhelpfully with a sheepish smile. Yeah, yeah, Taki wants us out. I get it. Naruto accepted with a small chuckle and a playful dismissive wave. Fu pouted cutely at him, obviously not enjoying being so predictable. Sounds like a pretty solid set of exams, but I still think my team are going to blast through it with ease. You'll see. He finished confidently, a cocky grin on his features that Uncle had told him often enough only ever led him to problems. Shouldn't you be going then? Naruto added with a glance at the sky, causing Fu to gape for a moment. You can already read the sky? She questioned incredulously, only getting a smirk as the redhead put a finger to his nose conspicuously. He leaned in, motioning for the girl to do the same with a subtle hand motion. Fu did so, her eyes wide and skin reddening from the close proximity to the taller Jonin. Then, when they were almost as close as they had been at that one time before, Naruto whispered softly, Nah, there's a clock in that ramen stand over there. Ah, damn it, don't do that! Fu shouted indigenously as she shot back, her face still glowing as she glanced in the direction of the shop Naruto gestured to. Sure enough, there was a small clock on the back wall, but it was too far away for Fu to make out the time on. Naruto had good eyes to be able to spot and read it. However, when she looked back around, the redhead was standing up on the branch, a bright grin on his face that was slowly matched by Fu, accepting her temporary defeat. Well, I guess I'll see you after the second test then. Take care of my cute little Genin. He gave a farewell wave and turned to leave, only pausing at Fu's voice. You're really so confident they'll pass? She asked, a bit of hesitance to her tone, as she wondered how Jinchuriki, of all people, could trust so completely. Naruto just turned and waved off all her concerns and doubts with just a glowing smile. I never have any doubts. And with that he allowed himself to simply walk backwards off the branch, vanishing in a vaguely red blur a moment later, and leaving Fu to stare after him. A moment later, and she had to lean back against the trunk of the tree, a hand up to her forehead as she smiled genuinely. What a weird guy. She had to call him weird. How else was she supposed to explain that flutter in her chest? End of chapter 17.